I thought grief would be the hardest part after my grandfather died. I was wrong. The real pain began when my own parents looked at me like an enemy, not a daughter. They didn't ask how I was surviving. They didn't ask what he meant to me. They went straight to court. They said I had stolen what never belonged to me. I stayed silent, carrying his last promise in my heart, knowing one truth could change everything. But I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Before I continue, tell me your country and the time right now. Because what happened next was something none of them ever saw coming. Cold earth pressed against my shoes as I stood beside my grandfather's grave, staring at the name carved into stone. Prayers floated around me, soft and distant, but I barely heard them. My chest felt hollow. My hands shook. And yet, beneath the grief, I felt something else. Eyes. Measuring. Watching. My parents stood a few steps away. My mother dabbed her eyes without tears. My father kept his hands folded, stiff, alert. They did not look at the coffin. They looked at people. Faces. Reactions. When the family lawyer approached briefly to offer condolences, everything changed. My mother's fingers dug into my arm. My father's jaw tightened. In that moment, I understood. This funeral was not about loss. It was about control. After the burial, guests gathered quietly. I stayed behind, unable to leave him yet. My grandfather had been my refuge, my only safe place in a loud, demanding family. Weeks earlier, he had held my hand and whispered words that made no sense then. "Promise me you will wait," he said. "Do not speak until they show themselves." I promised, confused, trusting him completely. That evening, I returned to his house. The silence inside felt wrong. I went straight to his study, a room he guarded carefully. The drawer where he kept important papers was open. Files were missing. The smell of his old books mixed with something sharp and unfamiliar. Panic crawled up my spine. Someone had been here. Someone with permission. At dinner, my mother's voice turned sharp. She asked where I had been. She asked why I spent so much time alone with him before he died. Her questions landed like accusations. I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "You think we don't see what you did," she said. My father stared at his plate. He said nothing. His silence was louder than her words. I went to my room feeling smaller than ever. I replayed every memory, searching for safety. There was none. I realized then that love in this family came with conditions. I cried quietly, afraid of being heard, afraid of what would come next. I barely slept. At dawn, the doorbell rang. A man in a dark suit stood outside, holding an envelope. Legal language stared back at me. My parents were suing me. Standing there, numb and exposed, I finally understood why my grandfather trusted me alone. And why the fight had already begun. I folded the letter with shaking hands, my pulse loud in my ears. The house felt smaller, like the walls were listening. From the hallway, I heard my parents whispering. My name slipped between them, sharp and cold. I pressed my back to the door, realizing this was no misunderstanding. This was war. Every step they took after his death led here. Every secret he had now waited on me. I did not open the envelope again. I did not scream. I chose silence, just as he taught me. Because once I spoke, nothing in this family would survive the truth. And as the sun rose higher, I knew the next move would decide who I became, and what they would do when they learned I was no longer afraid, but ready to fight, with something they never expected, still hidden, waiting, inside. Seeing my parents' names printed as plaintiffs felt unreal, like a cruel joke written by someone who hated me. I read the pages again and again, hoping the words would change. They didn't. Manipulation. Fraud. Elder abuse. Each accusation landed harder than the last. My chest burned, my ears rang, and my hands shook so badly I had to sit down on the cold courthouse bench. People passed me without looking. Shoes echoed on marble. Papers rustled. The world kept moving while mine froze in place. I pressed my palms together, trying to breathe, trying not to fall apart in public. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone what my grandfather really wanted. I wanted to say how he trusted me, how he warned me. But his voice came back to me, calm and steady. Wait until they show who they really are. So I swallowed my pain and stayed quiet. Inside the courtroom, my parents became strangers. They held hands and bowed their heads, playing the part of broken, grieving victims. My mother dabbed her eyes on cue. My father sighed deeply, as if the weight of betrayal crushed him. Their lawyer spoke smoothly, calling me distant and greedy, a granddaughter who took advantage of an old man. People whispered behind me. I stared straight ahead, barely recognizing the person they described. The judge listened without expression. He asked questions, took notes, and said very little. But sometimes his eyes lifted from the papers and rested on me. Not cold. Not accusing. Curious. It made my heart race. I wondered what he saw when he looked at my face. When court adjourned, my mother followed me into the hallway. Her heels clicked fast behind me. She grabbed my arm and pulled me close. Her smile was thin and sharp. "End this," she said quietly. "We can settle. Keep this in the family." I looked at her and realized she wasn't afraid of losing. She was afraid of losing control. My father stood a few steps behind her, staring at the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't stop her. That silence hurt more than her words. At home, the house felt empty and loud at the same time. Every clock tick sounded like a warning. I went straight to my grandfather's study, closing the door behind me. The wooden box he gave me sat where I left it, untouched. I opened it slowly. Letters. Bank receipts. Notes written in his careful handwriting. Proof he never wanted them to see. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name. I sat there for a long time, holding the box in my lap, feeling the weight of his trust and the danger of using it too soon. I could almost hear him telling me to be patient, to let greed expose itself fully, without interference or mercy. My silence was not weakness. It was strategy. It was protection. It was preparation for what was coming next. I needed perfect timing and control. My fingers hovered over it. My heart pounded. I knew that once I opened it, there would be no turning back. So I closed the box again. Because the evidence existed. And if I revealed it too soon, everything my grandfather planned could collapse before it even began, for everyone involved. I sat alone in my apartment that night, the lights off, the city noise pressing against the windows. My grandfather's voice came back to me without warning. Slow. Calm. Certain. He used to talk to me when everyone else was busy fighting over money in the other room. He always waited until the house was quiet. I remembered those long evenings at the dining table. Just the two of us. He would sip his tea and watch my parents argue through the half-open door. He never interrupted them. He just looked at me and raised his eyebrows, like he was asking me a question without words. "Listen carefully," he once said. "People reveal themselves when they think no one is watching." I didn't understand then. I do now. The memory shifted to the day he asked me to go to the bank with him. He said it was boring paperwork. My parents didn't come. They never liked wasting time on things that didn't benefit them immediately. I sat beside him while he signed documents, his hand steady, his eyes sharper than anyone realized. "Don't mention this," he told me softly as we left. Not yet. I trusted him. I always did. As the lawsuit moved forward, my parents changed completely. Or maybe they just stopped pretending. They called people from my past. Old coworkers. Distant relatives. They told stories about me that sounded convincing enough to hurt. My workplace grew cold. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Friends stopped calling. The silence was worse than the accusations. It made me question myself late at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my life. I wondered how easily a lie could erase years of truth. I wondered how someone could plan this much harm against their own child and still sleep at night. That was the night I opened the envelope. My hand shook as I broke the seal. Inside were copies of bank transfers, handwritten notes, and dated records. Every page connected to the next. A timeline. Clear. Precise. My grandfather had documented everything. Every attempt they made. Every signature they forged. Every withdrawal they tried to hide. I sat on the floor reading until my legs went numb. Tears fell, but not from fear. From clarity. Everything finally made sense. His silence. His patience. His trust in me. He knew this day would come. I realized then that this wasn't just an inheritance. It was a responsibility. A test of whether I would act out of anger or wisdom. Whether I would rush toward revenge or wait for justice to expose itself fully. But he also knew timing was everything. The papers felt heavy in my hands, like they carried his voice, his choices, and his final protection wrapped inside them, waiting for the exact moment to be used. I held the papers against my chest, my heart racing with a dangerous thought. I could end this now. I could destroy their lies in one moment. Then his voice echoed again in my head. Wait. I looked at the courtroom calendar on my phone. The judge. The hearings. The questions still unanswered. I realized the truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be seen by the right eyes. And I wasn't sure yet if the judge was ready to see it clearly and without bias at all. I sat in the courtroom while my parents performed grief like a script they had memorized. Tears appeared on cue. Voices trembled on demand. They spoke about sacrifices, about sleepless nights, about how much they had given me. I listened, frozen, while every sentence painted me as ungrateful and cold. The judge watched them closely. He nodded sometimes. Each nod felt like a weight pressing on my chest. I could feel the room leaning toward them, pulled by emotion instead of truth. Their lawyer stood and smiled politely. Then he said my name. He said he had a witness. A name from my past echoed through the courtroom, and my breath caught painfully. She walked in slowly, avoiding my eyes. Once, years ago, I had helped her when she had nothing. Now she pointed at me and called it manipulation. She said I pressured my grandfather. She said I planned everything. The room buzzed with whispers. My hands shook under the table. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed locked inside my throat. My parents watched her with satisfaction they didn't bother hiding. Doubt crept into me for the first time. What if truth was not enough? What if performance mattered more than facts? I felt small, exposed, and suddenly very alone. The judge ended the session without a decision. My mother brushed past me, whispering that I was losing. Her words followed me all the way outside. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel, replaying every second of the day. My phone vibrated with messages I could not open. Friends asked questions without answers. Fear settled deep in my stomach and refused to move. I wondered if staying silent was a mistake. I wondered if my grandfather had asked too much of me. For a moment, anger burned hotter than grief. I imagined standing up and shouting everything. But I remembered his eyes. The way he squeezed my hand. The way he told me patience would protect me. I inhaled slowly and forced myself to breathe. Inside the courthouse, my parents laughed quietly with their lawyer. That sound stayed with me. It echoed in my head like proof of their confidence. They believed the story was already written. That night, I drove to my grandfather's house. The lights were off, but the silence felt familiar. I sat in his chair and closed my eyes. I remembered his calm voice telling me to wait. He didn't just leave me evidence. He left me strength. He knew this moment would come. He trusted me to survive it. I wiped my tears and stood up. The next court date was coming fast. I still hadn't spoken. And everything depended on when I finally did. When the judge finally looked at me and asked if I had anything to add, the room felt smaller. My parents smirked at the same time. It was quick, practiced, cruel. They believed my silence meant I was afraid. They believed I was beaten. My hands trembled under the table, but I stood up slowly, feeling every eye burn into my skin. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. I asked the judge, in a steady voice I barely recognized, for permission to submit additional evidence. The air shifted immediately. My mother's smile vanished. Her lips parted, then pressed together hard. My father frowned, clearly confused, as if this moment was not part of the story he had rehearsed. Their lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting loudly, accusing me of delaying tactics. His voice echoed sharply, but the judge raised one hand and silenced him without effort. Permission granted. I walked to the clerk with a folder I had carried to every hearing. Until now, it had stayed closed. Inside were copies of bank records, property transfers, letters, and handwritten notes from my grandfather. As I handed them over, my fingers brushed the paper, and I felt his presence beside me, calm and steady. I returned to my seat without looking at my parents. The judge began to read. He did not rush. He did not speak. He simply turned pages, one after another. The silence became unbearable. Seconds stretched into minutes. My mouth was dry. My chest felt tight. I could hear my mother shifting in her chair. I could hear my father clear his throat too many times. Still, the judge read. Then he looked up. He asked my parents one simple question about a transfer made 2 years before my grandfather's death. My father answered first. His voice was confident, but too fast. My mother followed, correcting him without thinking. The correction contradicted his statement. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. He asked the question again, phrased differently. Their answers no longer aligned. I felt something inside me lift. Not relief. Not joy. Recognition. The judge asked for clarification. Their lawyer tried to intervene, speaking over them, guiding them, but the damage was already done. Confusion replaced confidence. My mother's hand shook as she spoke. My father avoided looking at her. The room felt unbalanced, like a structure starting to crack under sudden pressure. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw doubt ripple across the courtroom. Not sympathy for me, but suspicion toward them. The judge leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. His expression was unreadable. My pulse raced. I wanted him to rule. I wanted it to end right there. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke calmly and announced that the court would order a deeper investigation into the financial records and related conduct. Auditors would be assigned. Additional hearings would follow. He struck his gavel once. The sound echoed like a warning. As people stood and began to leave, my parents did not look at me. Their lawyer whispered urgently in their ears. I remained seated, heart racing, knowing I had finally spoken. My legs felt weak, but steady. But as I walked out of the courtroom, one terrifying thought followed me, heavier than fear, sharper than doubt, and impossible to ignore. The truth was out. Now I had to survive what came next. What followed was chaos, slow at first, then violent in its speed. Letters arrived. Calls came nonstop. Auditors walked into court carrying folders thicker than my grief. They spoke in numbers, dates, signatures. Each word hit my parents like a blow. I watched my mother's hands shake. My father stopped looking at me completely. Old bank transfers appeared on screens. Withdrawals made without consent. Accounts opened quietly, then drained. The courtroom felt colder. I could hear the hum of the lights above us. I could hear my own breathing. Every lie they told before began collapsing in public. During breaks, my parents stayed far away. No more angry stares. No more fake tears. Just silence. It was louder than their accusations ever were. Then they cornered me in the hallway. My mother grabbed my arm. Her nails pressed into my skin. "You think this ends well for you?" she whispered. "You don't know how much damage we can still do." My father leaned close. "You will regret this," he said. "People like you always do." My heart pounded, but I nodded calmly. I let them talk. I let them threaten. My phone recorded every word from my coat pocket. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I remembered my grandfather's voice telling me patience was power. That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt like danger. Every shadow felt heavy. I kept replaying their voices in my head, wondering how parents could become strangers so easily. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, asking myself if truth always required this much pain, and if I was strong enough to finish what I started. Fear sat in my chest, but beneath it, something harder was forming. The next morning, the judge sent a message through the clerk. He wanted to see me. Alone. No lawyers. No parents. Walking into his chambers felt different from walking into court. The air was quieter. The walls were lined with books, not accusations. He asked me to sit. He didn't rush. He didn't interrupt the silence. "Tell me about your grandfather," he said. "Not about the case. Not about money. About him." My throat tightened. I told him how my grandfather raised me when my parents were too busy fighting over things. I told him about evenings at the kitchen table, about lessons whispered instead of shouted. I told him how he taught me honesty when lies were easier. I told him why he trusted me. I didn't cry loudly. Tears just fell. I didn't try to sound convincing. I didn't plan my words. I spoke the truth as it lived inside me. The judge listened. His eyes never left my face. He didn't write notes. He didn't check the time. He let me finish. When I stopped talking, the room stayed quiet. "I see," he said finally. 2 words. But they felt heavier than any ruling. As I stood to leave, my hands were shaking again, but this time from relief. For the first time since my grandfather died, someone in power had heard me as a person, not a claim. I felt the balance of the case shift quietly. Outside, my parents waited, searching my face for answers. I gave them nothing. Not a word. Not a look. Not even anger. Silence was my shield now, and it scared them. Because the final hearing was coming. And when it did, everything they hid would be exposed forever, publicly, without mercy, at last, finally. The courtroom went silent as the judge began to speak. I felt every breath tighten my chest. Even the papers stopped moving. My parents sat stiff beside their lawyer, unaware that this moment would dismantle every lie they built inside. He read slowly, calmly, like a surgeon cutting without emotion. Each sentence landed heavy. Manipulation. Financial misconduct. Abuse of trust. I watched the color drain from my mother's face as the truth replaced the performance she rehearsed for years now. My father didn't cry. He didn't speak. He stared at the table like it could save him. His shoulders collapsed inward. For the first time in my life, he looked small, powerless, and exposed to everyone watching in that room. The judge dismissed every claim against me with firm clarity. No hesitation. No softness. My mother sobbed loudly, shaking her head. Her tears felt hollow. I sat still, realizing silence had protected me better than any scream ever before now. I expected relief, but my heart kept racing. The judge paused, flipping another page. That pause felt dangerous. My parents' lawyer shifted nervously. Something else was coming. I sensed it deep in my stomach before anyone else realized truth arrived. The judge looked directly at them. His voice hardened. He spoke about consequences, not emotions. About accountability beyond court victories. My mother's crying stopped instantly. Fear replaced performance. I realized justice wasn't finished speaking yet, and everyone could feel it. He outlined penalties, investigations, referrals. Each word cut deeper than anger ever could. I saw my parents' world shrinking in real time. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. And exposure hurt more than loss because lies hate bright light always. I finally looked at my parents, really looked. They avoided my eyes. No apology came. No regret. Only fear of consequences. I understood then that winning the case didn't heal the wound they created inside me during my childhood years. The judge wasn't finished. He warned them clearly. Future actions would bring harsher consequences. The courtroom felt heavier. I felt taller. Something shifted inside me. I was no longer defending myself. I was standing in my truth without fear now. My parents' lawyer whispered urgently, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Their story collapsed publicly. I saw panic replace arrogance. This wasn't just loss. It was humiliation they couldn't escape or rewrite despite money, power, or history together. I expected the judge to end there. He didn't. He added one final statement that froze me. He spoke about character. About patience. About restraint. His words were not for them. They were for me, and everyone felt that shift. He acknowledged my silence, my timing, my strength. My throat tightened. Tears burned my eyes. Not from pain, but validation. For the first time, someone in authority saw me clearly, without suspicion, without accusation, without trying to break me down. My parents looked defeated, but I felt unfinished. Justice had spoken, yet something lingered. Consequences mattered. Lessons mattered. I sensed the judge was about to deliver more than a ruling. He was about to decide impact that would echo forward. As he paused again, the room held its breath. I knew winning wasn't the end. Accountability was next. The masks were gone, but consequences were coming. And whatever followed would change every relationship forever, starting with the people who raised. The courtroom felt smaller when the judge looked directly at me. Not at my parents. Not at the lawyers. At me. My heart started pounding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I held my hands together to stop them from shaking. He said my name slowly. He said he had watched me from the first hearing. He said silence can be louder than shouting. I felt my throat tighten as he spoke about restraint. About how some people choose dignity even when they are being crushed. My mother shifted beside her lawyer. My father avoided my eyes. The judge said my grandfather trusted me for a reason. He said trust is earned, not demanded. I felt tears burn, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. He spoke about patience. About how I waited while lies were thrown at me. About how I didn't attack back. I remembered every night I cried alone. Every message I typed and deleted. Every moment I wanted to scream the truth. He said integrity is proven when no one is clapping. Then he ruled. He dismissed every claim against me. Every accusation. Every lie. His voice was calm, final, unmovable. The words echoed in my chest like thunder. I won. My mother gasped. My father finally looked up, but it was too late. Their faces looked empty, like masks without faces behind them. I felt relief crash over me, heavy and sudden. My knees weakened. I had to grip the chair to stay standing. This was justice. Real justice. But it didn't feel like victory. The judge continued speaking. He talked about consequences. About responsibility. About how courts exist to protect truth, not greed. I listened, but my mind drifted to my grandfather. I wished he was there. I wished he could see this. The judge turned to my parents. His tone changed. Sharper. Colder. He warned them about abuse of the legal system. He said their actions had been noted. My mother began to cry openly now. My father said nothing. I didn't look at them. The judge looked back at me and softened his voice. He said I carried myself with strength. He said I honored my grandfather not with anger, but with truth. Those words stayed with me. They still do. When he struck the gavel, the sound felt final. Like a door closing. People stood. Chairs scraped. Lawyers whispered. I stayed frozen for a moment, breathing in the air, letting it settle into my body. I was no longer accused. I was no longer defending myself. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. Questions were shouted. I walked past them all. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. In the hallway, I finally exhaled. I felt lighter, but also strangely exposed. Without the fight, who was I now? As I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face. I realized something then. Winning the case didn't heal the wounds. It only gave me space to start. I knew the silence ahead would be louder than the courtroom ever was. Healing meant facing memories without a judge, without rules. As I walked away, one question followed me, heavy and unresolved. Could I rebuild myself after winning, or would the damage finally demand its price? I walked out of the courthouse alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. The doors closed behind me, heavy and final, and the noise of the hallway faded. My hands were steady for the first time in months. The inheritance was never about money. It was about being seen, trusted, and protected by the one person who truly knew me. Outside, the air felt different. Cleaner. I breathed without fear of the next message, the next threat, the next lie. My parents stood across the steps, smaller now, quiet, exposed. They lost more than a case that day. They lost the power they believed they owned over my life. I remembered my grandfather's voice, calm and certain, telling me to be patient. He knew the truth would hurt before it healed. I honored him exactly the way he hoped I would. Not with revenge. Not with shouting. With truth placed carefully where it could not be denied. The past no longer controlled me. I stopped replaying their words in my head. I stopped asking why love turned into hunger. I chose peace over bitterness, strength over silence. That choice felt like setting down a heavy bag I had carried for years. I went home and opened the windows. Light moved across the floor. I touched the table he once fixed, the chair he used every evening. These things stayed, but the fear did not. I understood then that justice is quiet. It does not scream. It settles. I will rebuild without asking permission. I will protect my future without apology. I will remember who stood with me when standing was hardest. Some betrayals teach you who to fear. Others teach you who you are. Mine taught me both. I am not the story they tried to write. I am the woman who finished it. I walked forward alone, steady and clear, carrying his trust like a compass. And for the first time I knew exactly where I was going. Tomorrow will bring silence instead of summons, work instead of war. I will plant roots where fear once lived. I will speak my name without shaking. The judge met me, but my life met me too. I choose it fully, openly, and without looking back. This ending is my beginning, and I protect it with unwavering resolve forever forward.